Well, thank you everybody for joining and welcome to our next installment in our value creation webinar series. In the past, you may have seen we've covered other topics such as budgeting and organizational design. Today, we're focused on add-on integrations and how past acquisitions can reveal even more value through thoughtful and effective integration planning and execution. So looking forward to the session today. Once again, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. If you do have questions as we go through this, please insert them into the chat and we'll be sure to address those throughout and as well as at the end. So a quick rundown of the agenda for today. We'll just do quick introductions here very quickly, go through key value creation driver add-ons and integrations, and then talk about what this Frankenstein effect is, understand kind of what that is and how you address that. And then we'll swiftly move into how you can prevent the Frankenstein effect with multiple acquisitions and then finally Q&A. So that's kind of our agenda here as we go through the next 45 minutes to an hour. So once again, thank you. We'll go to the next slide here. Just very quickly, my name is Faisal Haq. I'm part of the Impact Point M&A Ops practice with over 25 years of experience in merger integration, supporting corporate and private equity clients. My focus area is operational due diligence and merger integration. Prior to Impact Point, I was with multiple Big Four consulting firms as partner and MD. So again, looking forward to the session, excited about it.
Thanks, Faisal. I'm Chad Stacey, a partner at Impact Point, focusing on M&A, specifically pre-acquisition diligence, synergy assessments, post-merger integration, carve-out support. Really pleased to be here today to discuss this topic as the buy and build strategy is a prevalent lever that our PE clients are using to create value. In addition to Impact Point, I've also worked with firms including A&M and their private equity performance improvement group, and EY across Australia and the UK. I'm also the program director for a council of M&A executives at the Conference Board, which is a not-for-profit think tank, which has a number of US-based serial acquirers, also joined by Jeremiah, who's a manager in our team.
Hey everyone, Jeremiah McFerrin. As Chad mentioned, I work with Faisal and Chad in the IPC M&A Ops group. I have over 10 years of experience in M&A advisory and looking forward to this conversation.
Great. So to begin with, now let's discuss what the buy and build strategy actually is. So we all understand that PE portfolio companies can rapidly grow through the size of their organizations through add-ons. However, the value created through this process is twofold. So number one, there's efficiency to be gained through scale, and therefore acquiring businesses and effectively integrating these businesses will realize synergies, both from a growth and cost efficiency perspective. But secondly, there's substantial financial arbitrage, which is what this page is showing. So as you can see in the chart on the right, larger businesses will have higher EBITDA multiples. So as you can see, where the deal size is greater than 1 billion, based on this analysis over more than a 10-year period, the multiple was 13 on that chart on the right-hand side. And where the deal size was under 50 million, the median multiple was 8. So the concept here is a PE firm can acquire a platform business and acquire multiple smaller businesses at lower EBITDA multiples. And then when selling the combined business, the overall size should be higher than the entry multiple for the platform, as well as the entry multiples for the add-ons. So therefore, upon sale, the exit multiple for the combined business is higher than the multiples of all the acquired businesses at the time of each acquisition. So what we're showing here is kind of how prevalent the buy and build strategy has been for US private equity firms. The chart on the left is showing the percentage of add-on deals versus platform acquisitions. So what you can see here is in recent years, the last 3-4 years, it's been about 3/4 of all US PE deals. But about 10 years ago, it was closer to 60%. And the chart on the right kind of demonstrates this also, that you can see that the light blue bar shows that 41% of all USP deals last year were under 25 million in deal size, and 69%, which includes that the darker blue shade, were below 100 million. So really, even though PE deal activity has been slightly down in 22 and 23 in particular, you can see that the number of deals are still quite high, especially in the chart on the left, but mostly from add-on acquisitions.
Well, great. So although Halloween is several months out, we do still have this Frankenstein. And what do we mean by the Frankenstein as we talk about it here? So as Chad mentioned, there's multiple acquisitions, multiple add-ons that are being closed on, and typically what you start to see is they're not well integrated. So for example, we had a client last year that completed or closed 43 add-on acquisitions over a 3-year period, got to about 200 million in revenue, but all with disparate processes. So a lot of inefficiencies around sales processes, operational processes. There was a lack of overall integration. And so what you have is this, for example, a commissions process within sales being followed differently in different parts of the business, because historically they did commissions differently in the Southwest versus the Northeast of the country. So you kind of get this prevailing effect of different processes, different tools, different people doing the same activity. And so value creation starts to erode. There's definitely value that's left on the table with multiple duplicate activity going on across the board. And then you can imagine culture. What happens to culture as you have, for example, like the 40 add-on acquisitions? How do you maintain a culture across the board? And soon that seems that starts to dissipate. Talent starts to leave. So again, you kind of get this, what we refer to as the Frankenstein effect of multiple add-ons resulting in duplication of resources, duplication of processes. So how do you deal with this? In the next section, we're going to talk about how you uncover the gaps and how you close the gaps in terms of completing a full integration. So before we jump into kind of a little more content here, we thought it would be interesting to do a poll. So if you would like to participate on your handheld device on your phone, if you go to menti.com and enter in this code 87495433, you'll be able to see this question and enter your answer here, which will give us some idea of what you've experienced in the past as well. So we've already got some entries here. Definitely looking like this is quite common. So again, thanks for kind of participating there. So hopefully this is already starting to resonate in terms of your experiences and seeing this Frankenstein effect. Let's go to the next question here. So what do you consider the most important success factor in an effective integration? So the potential answers are clear strategy, investment thesis, executive sponsorship, strong change management, communication, retaining critical talent, and other. Looks like there's a common theme that's coming through here around change management and communications. And we've got some others here, strategy and investment thesis. So as the answers continue to come in here, I'll share, this is very common. And this also bleeds into cultural integration, which we'll talk about as we go further into the session. But typically, this is the main issue area, right? Around making sure that there is a communication plan, that at all times, all employees, all customers, and suppliers are aware of the key milestones, what's going on with the integration, what's in it for them, when is it happening. And that also, as I mentioned, then connects to culture, a culture of, potential transparency. And it's possible that not all the answers are there, but it's okay, for leaders in the companies to say, we're working through it. We don't have the answer yet. But again, it creates an effective change management plan. Effective communication is very critical. So you may be able to integrate systems, processes, and publish an organization chart, but the culture of, around communications and change management, if there's no transparency there, integrations typically fail when that is not executed well. Great, let's go to the next question here. I think our last question in this section. What is the biggest challenge you commonly experience when going through an integration? Great. Talent retention, culture, as we started to talk about, process harmonization. So a good variety of experiences here. Great. Biggest challenges. I'll share a story around leadership alignment. And this also bleeds into culture. In the past, was part of a large transaction where companies coming together, decision-making process was different. One was top-down, the other one was consensus-based. And so you have, two groups of leaderships coming together, multiple groups with multiple add-ons, and there's a different process in decision-making and how you go about it. And then there's confusion across the board in terms of decision making, who's making the approvals and so forth. And so this is a critical element that top-down leadership should be aligned. And it starts from the beginning on when you have the all hands, when you kick off the integration, having leadership standing in the front, talking about how while your day jobs are important, this is as important to achieve the integration for multiple acquisitions so that everybody is aligned, and having the leadership involved almost on a weekly, daily basis is critical. So a lot of times you'll see a steering committee being designed and deployed where leadership is getting the key issues, the key topics, key decision topics coming through and having an impact on the overall integration. The other piece I see here, the culture alignment, I started to talk about that earlier, that this is probably the most important around integrations, that you may be able to do systems. You may come up with a Smartsheet project plan that's going to integrate the systems, but you can't really come up with a project plan to integrate cultures. You may have specific communications elements, specific all hands meetings, specific events, but really this is cultural alignment occurs in the hallways, in how you send emails, how you run meetings, how you make decisions. So it's almost like a daily, hourly activity that is important, which is important in a company in general. But then when integrations are occurring, multiple ideas or varying thought processes are coming together, having that cultural alignment is going to be critical. And there's no secret sauce to achieving it. It's really, on how you take on every activity, all the day-to-day activities as they pertain to integration. That's really how it comes through. So great. Thank you for participating. Let's go on to the next section. So here we're going to talk about addressing the Frankenstein. And really, typically what we've done in the past is what we refer to as an add-on integration assessment. And the benefits of doing this is you kind of, at the end of this process, you'll be able to have a roadmap on achieving full integration. And by the way, full integration is not integrating everything, may not integrate everything. It really depends on the thesis. So if you invested in a company for their secret sauce in operations or sales, you may not want to touch that and leave that part of the business alone. whereas you may do full back office integration, and that is the definition of full integration for that add-on, for those set of add-ons. And that's going to be, once you achieve that, that's full integration. So having that roadmap is going to be critical. The second item here around value protection, there's a reason why you have invested in the add-ons, in the additional acquisitions. You don't want to mess that up. Again, there's some secret sauce there. There's something happening there that's accretive to the overall platform, to the business. So you need to protect that. So making sure that you don't just integrate sales just because you have to do full integration. And then moving on, reducing the friction. So this could be, again, culturally, different processes as well. And so understanding kind of where the obstacles are, where the challenges could be as part of this assessment will be important to assess and then to address. Then value creation opportunities. So specifically, what are the opportunities or initiatives that you can launch to have a positive impact on EBITDA or to have an impact on the working capital, as well as other topics as well. And then going forward, it essentially turns into a playbook for achieving future integrations. So overall, integration assessments could help you with these different aspects. So typically what you'd want to do in an assessment is, it's usually a 2-3 week exercise that you'd want to do. It really depends on, the number of add-ons you want to put in scope in terms of assessment. Obviously, 40 add-ons would take a little longer, but typically there's usually 10 or less add-ons that you want to look at. And so you'll do a kickoff. Typically, there is a set of questions that you can provide as for data gathering with a data request list on what are the checklists that exist today, how the platform and the add-ons do integrations today. So there's a questionnaire, there's a checklist, and then it's really talking to the leaders, talking to the business leaders, the core leadership team, as well as the functional leaders and team members in the functional teams on their experiences throughout the integrations. Analyzing kind of the checklist that you get back, and then understanding and defining what the critical aspects of the integrations are. And we'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide, but defining what is critical and what is non-critical for the integration to occur. And then it's a review of kind of the findings in a report, and then a kind of a gap assessment report that you can provide with a roadmap to achieving full integration. So that's kind of the overall process that you'd want to follow as you look to assess integrations. So just as an example here, the first step in doing the add-on integration is actually focus on the platform first. So understanding the platform's capabilities and skills and tools to take on add-ons. And so the first step really is, what is the team that takes on integrations within the platform? Is there a core group? What is the capability there? What is the experience level there? Do they have day jobs? Are they fully dedicated to this effort? What is the overall vision? So there may be different deal thesis. As a result, there may be different scenarios for integration. I talked about one where you leave sales and operations alone, but you do the back office integration. In that case, that's kind of a hybrid integration. Another integration scenario, which we'll talk about, could be more of where you have a full tuck-in. So what are the different scenarios? Do they have that defined? Do they have that documented? Is there a playbook? How do they look at synergies? Do they have a standard kind of playbook, checklist, and math in terms of what the opportunities could be? So again, the first step is to look at the platform and its capabilities and give it a grade. You see in the example here on the left that in this example, when we did the review, different areas, for example, they were very, very good in synergy assessments and achieving those results. More, need room for improvement on the team structure. In this case, they didn't really have a dedicated integration leader. One of the findings was that, you should probably have at least one full-time equivalent that is solely, the integration management office leader or the integration leader. So again, it kind of depends, but this will give you a starting point on where the gaps could be within the platform and its capabilities. On the right, what you see are your typical functions and departments. The critical step here is to identify what are the main integration items. So in this case, you see the gray areas. Those are highlighted as critical to the integrations. So in the first several months of multiple add-ons coming in, you've got to integrate HR in this example, IT, finance, accounting, but not so much sales, not so much branding. That could come, after the 100 days, for example. So they are less critical. The immediate are kind of the typical back office functions. This is important in defining because, as I mentioned earlier, this helps you define full integration. So once you have an overall view of the platform and where it stands in terms of the scorecard for being able to take on multiple acquisitions, then you've got to look at each add-on. So whatever the scope of the add-ons are, if there's 9 or 10 add-ons, look at each add-on and you see kind of the dashboard here, the left side, the top left of the dashboard, where you look at in a timeline of, whatever the timeline is defined. In this case, it was roughly, 12 months. And then identifying the critical items and the non-critical items and where they are in terms of completion. So in this example, you see the critical items are completed, within the first 2, 3 months. And then the other items where you see the light blue, still work remains to be done, but that's okay. And this add-on, they've done a good job of doing the integration. On the right side, number 2 and number 3, you see the critical and non-critical areas. And basically what this dashboard provides is a view of, what the status is for each functional area, as well as synergy and realizing those synergies and kind of the gaps that need to be achieved or closed to achieve full integration. So, kind of going through having if you think about the first slide in this section around the methodology, submitting the questionnaires, meeting with management, understanding, what checklist occurs, you can actually do this assessment on each add-on pretty quickly within one meeting and a few hours, you can kind of get a pretty good understanding. And so within a 2, 3 week period, you can look at several different add-ons and have a pretty good gap analysis here. So this is kind of putting together all of the add-on assessments. So in this case, if you look at kind of the left circles here in the light blue, there are roughly 9 add-ons that we looked at in this example. On the left side of the slide, you see the timeline. So in the first 2 months, it's critical to integrate all of the critical items in the example that we talked about, HR, IT, finance. And then the bulk of this slide with the Harvey balls shows you a level of completion of the integration with the critical items highlighted. So if you look at, add-on number 2 as an example here, great job doing the back office integration, which was critical. Work remains in some of the other areas, sales, marketing, but that could be okay, right? That's what the full integration is defined as here. Overall, this gives you a dashboard and a roadmap to where the gaps are. Then next, what you would have is essentially this roadmap of how do you close those gaps for each one of these 9 integrations. One of the topics we touched on earlier, and it also came up in the polling question, was culture integration. So what we just went through, we did the assessment. When we're talking to people, we're doing the interviews, we start to understand culture in the platform as well as in the multiple add-ons. And getting a good grasp of the culture and what the culture should be is fairly critical. As I mentioned, there isn't a project plan that you can execute with a set of activities and achieve full cultural integration. This is probably the most important aspect, which you all mentioned as well, using the example. So the first point here around, I'll just pick one example here, power distribution. I mentioned this already. How are decisions made? When we talk about culture, what are the ways that decisions are made? Are they consensus based or are they top down? And I shared the example, where there were different approaches in decision making. And if that's not aligned right away and in how you run meetings, in every day-to-day activity, value erodes, talent leaves eventually, and it could, you'll leave a lot on the table. So culture integration is a critical aspect of overall just achieving full integration. So finally, what do we do next? We've gone through, we've done an assessment of the platform. We may have identified some gaps there. There could be people, process, systems related. And then we've gone through 9 or 10 add-ons. So what are the next steps? We've got a gap analysis, we've got a roadmap. Let's go through, remediate those issues. Let's execute the integrations where the gaps are, and let's close the gaps in terms of those integrations. There's conduct a lessons learned exercise. So you've got all these findings. They could be systems related. They could be, there's no dedicated IMO leader, integration leader. So they could be people related. Let's go through those lessons learned and let's hone in and create a better machine or factory for integrations. And then, aligning the future vision and growth strategy, a critical element of how you would do the integration. So making sure that, it's clear on what the different thesis could be, what the different approaches to integrations could be, and what the desired outcomes would be for each different scenario, which Chad will talk about as well in the next sections around, how we address this. And then last piece here is having a repeatable playbook. Having a playbook that has, the tools, the checklists on achieving integrations, and having a playbook for each area, each critical area, as well as non-critical area. So HR, what are the 20 activities that need to occur? What are the, systems related activities that need to occur in technology? So having a playbook, because as you do become or are the serial acquirer, in the first example I gave, 43 acquisitions in 3 years, got to 200 million in revenue. It would be great if there's a playbook there that are repeatable, that folks are trained on, that they can use and really become a factory for integrations.
And Faisal, I think if you think about exiting the overall portfolio company on a combined basis, it's far more attractive to a seller to have a business which has one unified set of people, processes, and systems, and not having this Frankenstein effect. But secondly, if you have a plan in place to achieve some synergies through having a well-defined integration plan for what's remaining, sometimes the buyer might be willing to pay for some of those synergies as part of valuation as well.
Right.
So just moving to the next section, and thanks for going through that, Faisal, on the Frankenstein effect. What I'm going to talk about now is really preventing the Frankenstein effect. What can you do on the front end to minimize this effect occurring? So we've got a few more polling questions, and then we'll get into the detail. So, and as part of this, I'm going to talk about integration archetypes, operating models, and playbooks. So it'd just be good to understand initially, does your organization actually think about or has it defined an operating model to support integrations? We'll just wait for a few more answers. There's a bit of a mix, and I think we'll talk more about what is an operating model, and maybe that's some of the confusion as well. But in my experience, a lot of times people have a good understanding of deal thesis, but actually defining the operating model, sometimes it's a little bit hit and miss. So we'll go into that. Let's go to the next question. Does your organization have a documented integration playbook? a bit of a mix here, and I think I'm going to go into detail on integration archetypes as well shortly. But I think you'll find typically businesses that have integration playbooks are serial acquirers. But it's something it's really worth considering if you're new into if you just acquired a platform and your strategy is to buy 5 to 10 acquisitions over a short period of time. Defining that on the front end can provide a lot of value. Okay, so now we're going to discuss how to prevent or minimize the Frankenstein effect from occurring. So this entails some strategy development on the front end and planning on the front end, which includes, as I mentioned, the development of an operating model by core function, and it can entail developing a playbook. But what we see here is really what we're calling integration archetypes. So on one side of the spectrum, really the top left is what we call preservation. So as you can see, target is primarily left to run autonomously, maintaining its identity and key values. So effectively, no integration on one side, which is pretty rare, but this can occur where an acquired business has significant value as a standalone business and has fundamental differences to the parent company. Which could relate to cultural differences, but in some cases, no integration occurs, but can be partially integrated at a later stage. On the other side of the spectrum, which is the bottom right, where it says absorption, basically we have full integration where a business is entirely integrated across all functions. So this is common where there's a roll-up of smaller businesses into one larger brand. An example would be DSOs, dental service organizations. So you have a roll-up strategy where a parent is buying a lot of these dental organizations, and they centralize the back office, and they have one centralized set of tools and systems, a unified set of systems. So that would be one example. But in most cases, you see what we'd call a hybrid, which is really the bottom left, or the top right, symbiotic, which is a form of hybrid. So basically, at least in the first year, a lot of integration has that hybrid approach. And typically your corporate functions, so IT, finance, HR, will usually be integrated to a degree where possible. And there may be a slower approach or a more well thought out approach for the go-to-market operations functions. So we often see this where there's a lot of value in a local market, where a brand has a lot of value in that local market. And the sales force has deep local relationships, so they need to keep those relationships, and it just takes a bit of time to do integration for more customer-facing type roles. The symbiotic archetype in the top right, as you can see, it's the best of breed type model. So this is a type of hybrid as well, but basically what we're doing here is it's typically where you have a bit of a merger of equals or a significant integration in terms of size. So the acquisition is significant enough that a best of breed approach is undertaken. Basically, what we want to be doing here is considering what is like the optimal organization structure, systems, processes, based on what each company brings to the table. So this is quite common where it's not so much a buy and build strategy, it's more, again, a larger integration. But the bottom right would be your typical buy and build strategy. You're buying a larger platform and a lot of these smaller tuck-ins. Sometimes the strategy is to do a combination of both. But as you can imagine, and we're going to talk about operating models and playbooks shortly, as you can imagine, defining what your integration approach can lean into how you define your operating model and how you define your playbook. So what we have here is just kind of looking at the operating model at a high level. So when we use the term operating model, it can be a little different across organizations, but what we're talking about here is really the people, processes, and systems of each function for the organization. So again, this is highly dependent on the integration archetype for the particular deal. So when we're considering the organization, you can see on the top left, you've got org design, efficiency, location model, and sourcing model. So we'll consider different types of models, right? You might have a centralization of shared services. You could have an offshoring type model, like a hub and spoke type model where you're moving more transactional type services to best cost locations and you're having more management positions in higher cost locations. You may even have an outsourcing type model where the benefit of external expertise is needed, or costs are favorable to just outsource a particular function. But what's important is these decisions, you should be considering the end state solution. So if you're planning to acquire 10 add-ons in, say, 4 years or 5 years, what is the scalable long-term solution, and when should you be thinking about moving to that longer-term solution? So for example, you might have your IT function outsourced to an MSP, and that might be the right solution today. It might be the right solution, in 4 or 5 years from now, but maybe the better solution would be to bring that in-house when you get to a certain size and scale. So after 10 acquisitions and you've tripled in size, is it still right to outsource your IT? One of the contributing factors of the Frankenstein effect is that add-ons, when add-ons are acquired, there's a significant focus on defining the organization to be effective from day one. So that is, I think Faisal spoke about it around how we try to minimize disruption. And that's absolutely the right approach for day one. And it's a good initial strategy. What will happen is if you don't think about the longer term solution, the longer term operating model, in 2 to 3 years, you have this mess, especially after you've done, 3, 4, 5, 6 add-on acquisitions and you've done very little organizational integration. So this goes hand in hand with the technology aspects of the operating model. For example, if you have an accounts payable department, it's optimal to be on one AP system to maximize efficiency. We often see situations where functions are still split into, the various acquired businesses simply because there hasn't been an effective technology operating model designed. So there may be some centralization of the organization, and you may move workforces into one location, but you might still have disparate systems and processes, and they're using legacy systems. So you're losing a lot of the efficiency because you have the organization still split into servicing different add-ons because the technology operating model or the technology integration hasn't taken place. So, as part of your technology op model, and you should be thinking this at the functional level, should be considering rationalizing duplicative systems, integrating where it makes sense to one common set of applications. So in addition to your org and your technology or model, you also need to be thinking about defining your processes so you have a streamlined and an efficient process or processes across each function. And part of this is defining, you can see on here, your operating performance and process efficiencies, defining your OKRs and KPIs, which define success for the function. Unifying processes is dependent on technology integrations. However, there are some processes which should be defined, immediately or pretty close to day one. That's including things like the approval matrix and having that well defined, in the first 100 days. That can provide a lot of alignment post acquisition for each add-on. So on this page, this is just showing an example of where you have. So on the left-hand side, this is showing where an example finance operation. This is one of our case studies, but essentially you see that the HQ is in California, and that they have finance operations across the country. You could develop this kind of map for every function, but it is a good way to think about it by thinking about each individual function. And you might not even just think about finance. It might be more as like, where is AP, where is AR, where is the accounting team, FP&A team? Do you have FP&A teams supporting each add-on if they're still separate, or have you centralized that function? Sometimes you have like business units or add-ons and they have their own finance business partners separated out. So you have to think about all of that. But the pyramid structure on the right is a good way to think about it. It's very similar to the circular structure on the previous page. But this is thinking it from a top down, what are your strategic goals for the function? And then how do you prioritize your integration plan activities based on those strategic goals? And then the 6 sections at the bottom, it's a good way to think about it. On the right-hand side, you have like where work is done, how work is done, and what work is done. And you should think about those 3 questions in alignment with what we showed on the previous page around people, processes, and systems, and thinking through, does it make sense to go through, like I mentioned, the shared services model, global, regional, local design models, the hub and spoke model, etc. And then the bottom left, it's a little bit around like how do you define the P&L structure, the org structure? How do you define your talent management strategy and making sure that skills are aligned to what's required? So it's all well and good to move the finance function to, India or the Philippines, etc. But do they have the right skill set and efficiency, or do you need to have people who speak the local language very fluently? And then the governance structure, we talked a little bit about, the approval matrix and how important that is, but defining the overall governance structure for each function is also critical. If you don't have that well defined, you will continue to have disparate processes at each add-on. So, a lot of times these add-ons are smaller businesses that are founder-led, and the CEO may have been the founder and they created this great private company, but they're used to making every decision. If you don't define like what decisions the different roles can make moving forward, you're gonna just have this situation where you may have, Fessel spoke a little bit about leadership and cultural misalignment, and that's a big piece of it, right? Making sure that they're aligned to what the overall company and how they operate is essential. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about playbooks and kind of why, when you would need one, what are some of the best practices and what to look out for. So I think playbooks are they're really essential for where you have if you plan to be a serial acquirer, or if you're running a buy and build strategy, you're planning to do more than 3 acquisitions. You could be planning to do 10 acquisitions over the investment horizon for a platform acquisition. And I think they're pretty essential for all businesses, whether or not the management team has experience in M&A or not. The playbook should have enough detail so that all of the involved integration parties or the integration team understand what their roles are, but it shouldn't be some kind of big book or Bible where no one's going to read it. So it needs to have enough detail so it's very clear what the accountable actions are, and it should be applicable to really what your planned integration archetypes will be moving forward. So if you are doing a roll-up strategy where you're planning to do full integration, it should go into a level of detail where that can happen, but it might need to have a little bit of flexibility if you are planning to do some larger acquisitions. Some of it might be more, how do you define your go-to-market or your operations strategy? Well, that might be deal dependent, so you can't necessarily define that. But what you can define is the governance structure. What is the IMO structure? Who gets involved and when in that process? Do they get involved from term sheet or from signing through to deal close? Or are they involved? Are the people that are involved during diligence, are they also involved post-close? So defining all of that can still be well defined, irrespective of what integration archetype you have. So as I mentioned, it is important that the full integration team have provided the playbook, and it's not just the IMO and a few key people. I have seen that sometimes you have an integration playbook, the IMO has really written it and they have it, but it may have been sent out, but there's no real accountability, or there's no way of it's not really communicated effectively, or if it's a one-time document that's produced and then they don't really look at it again. So I think it's important to find that right balance where it can be used time and time again, but there also needs to be a feedback loop that the lessons learned from each integration can be applied to the playbook. You modify it based on the situation. So this page, let's just go back for a second. I think I didn't go into a lot of detail on this page, but I think that the benefits, it's pretty clear, the benefits of having a well-defined playbook are you align on top-down messaging. There's clarity and buy-in across the organization for the deals. The standardization of processes, and you define the integration process. So there's a framework and structure. The integration toolkit, we're going to show on the next page some examples of what can go in there, but I think it can be a tactical document as well, where you might have checklists in, for example, an Excel or a smart sheet that might be accompanying the playbook. But it does provide a lot of organization and accountability, so you're not starting from scratch each time. And then it does accelerate the process. You can have continuous improvement and provides a lot more efficiency, especially if you're doing, 2, 3, 4 acquisitions each year. I think having a playbook, a repeatable process is really important. And then on the next page, this is just showing some example structures of what goes in a playbook. So you could have an end-to-end process, from the term sheet or signing through to, or actually, pre-signing, it could be part of the diligence cycle, and then basically getting through to day one, first 100 days, and then longer term integration planning. So just defining who gets involved and when, and what the steps are. Defining accountability for each step is pretty important. So again, as I mentioned, not just the IMO, it should be the functional teams as well, what they need to be responsible for, who typically goes into the steering committee, what other leadership committees need to be set up, if any. In the middle section, as I mentioned, you should have supporting documents. It doesn't have to go into the playbook, but it'd be good to have a standard set of integration plans and checklists, a day one checklist by function, as well as the typical items that need to happen. It can be a diligence questionnaire as well. And then, what typically needs to happen for day one, and what needs to happen moving forward. And all of this should be aligned, again, to what you've defined as part of your operating model. And then, as I mentioned, it really should contain accountabilities or assigned actions by specific individual, and it shouldn't just be the IMO. It needs to be for each function, who would typically be the person responsible for doing these particular activities, and they need to be held accountable to those. Okay, so that's the end of that section. We did want to open it up for some Q&A. I think the way to do that, as Faisal mentioned at the start, was to put your questions into the chat section. I don't see any in there just yet, so if you have any questions, now's your opportunity. Okay, yeah. Looks like we don't have any questions. Give it one more minute and then we can adjourn. So if there are, as this page mentions, if there's anything that you would like us to, support you in, happy to have a conversation about your situation. We do have sample templates and playbooks. We can talk about best practices, some of these topics. So yeah, really pleased to have this conversation with you all, and thank you for joining.